Hi, I am Jonathan Louderback. I honestly have forgotten the full thing.
This is Loudest Crow. He's John Louderback. I'm Justin Crow, and we're here to caw through the noise.
Okay, I forgot that I said that part. I was thinking to myself for some reason that you said, I said I'm Jonathan Louderback, you say you're Justin Crow. This is the Loudest Crow, we're here to caw through the noise. But I recognize my mistake now.
That's okay.
I really want to talk about game design this time.
You know what? I'm totally down for that. You've already piqued my interest.
So I've been playing a lot of Project Zomboid.
Yes, you've been telling me about that.
And I just have to say, it's actually, I want to say on Steam, I want to say it's still in alpha, like they still put the alpha tag on it, but it is already, I say already, it's been in development for 10 years. Even though they still consider, they still have the alpha tag on it, even though they sell it for only $20, I would go so far as to say it's just like probably one of the best games I've ever played.
Really?
It is a top-down, ultra-realistic RPG survival simulator in a zombie apocalypse, right? What's so fascinating about the game is, like, it's strange because the game has lived for so long that it's had so much time to bake and develop, and it's had so many people who've worked on it, that there's been multiple games from this game. But I think the game just delivers so thoroughly on its premises. Like, it just fires on all cylinders in the things it's trying to do. And it does it so well. And every single piece plays into the whole that is the game. Just for example, the game starts, whenever you make your character, it goes to a black screen that says, these are the end times, these are the end of days, this is the story of how you died. Click to start. And you click to start. So the game has no win condition. You can't get a win screen whatsoever. It is you make your character in the world near the beginning of the zombie apocalypse, and in single player, you are the only person that you will ever see who is a human being. So you're just left to survive, thrown into an entire county that you could spend it takes like 6 hours to walk from left to right on just pure walking, and to see what you could do. And it really brilliantly destroys all your conceptions about a zombie game going into it are just completely shattered. Running will kill you. It says so in the tutorial. Don't run, you will die. It's like guns are bad. I'm kind of really scatterbrained about this. Fundamentally, though, the reason it just fascinates me so much, and the reason, because I've finally gotten over this barrier of entry, because the barrier of entry is that initial assumption about how zombie games are supposed to work. You go in there, you think, okay, I play careful, I play safe until I get a gun. Once I find my gun, I go crazy until I find more and more for my gun. Infinite zombie killing bonanza. But it really isn't that way. Zombies are slow, easy to avoid. You can outpace them with your walking speed. And they're shambling, slow, not very dangerous, like literally almost a non-threat by themselves. But as soon as there's 2 or 3, and then any number past that, you have to take them seriously. And if you don't, like I did, or like many people do whenever they first play the game, because of all these assumptions of all these zombie games that you've played for so long, you will die, and you will die a lot. I've only just now, I have 30 hours in the game. I've just made a character on the basic settings, like the actual, like the settings you're supposed to play on, that has survived past 5 days in game time. And I hate to say that it's good because it's hard, and it's not. It's good because it's one of those games that's so hard, but every time you make a mistake, like every time you die, you know it's because you made a mistake, not because the game was just fucking you over. You know what I mean? I have so much I could say about it, but I don't have any organization in my thoughts whatsoever. There have been tons of video essays made about the game in different moments from it, and it's one of those games that has so much to it that you really can't describe everything to a person just like through a dialogue.
Well, for starters, I know next to nothing about the game. I know it's called Project Zomboid, and I know what you just told me, and that's about it.
Mm-hmm.
But it does sound very interesting how you mentioned that right off the bat, it subverts your expectations about how these games normally go. And I think it's very valuable to have games that do that, because that means everyone who approaches that game is at the same level of entry, essentially. Mm-hmm. In fact, going into it fresh without having played any other zombie games may be better, depending on who you are, than having played more traditional zombie games, because that way you aren't like breaking old habits. That way you can just go right into the experience and take it at face value. But the fact that you're still able to enjoy it, having plenty of experience with other games, and in fact enjoying the fact that it's subverting your expectations, I think is really cool and interesting. I love how you mentioned that running is actually bad, because I think about a lot of games that I've played, like take Minecraft for example. I play that all the time.
Why would you not run?
Why would you not run? The only time in the whole game where like you wouldn't run is if you're like fighting the warden and you need to sneak around, right? Which I think is actually a very cool thing that they added, because it fundamentally changes how you
have to interact with the system.
Yeah.
Entirely different.
Exactly, because in every other place in Minecraft, you just run from point A to point B, whether that's to fight the Ender Dragon or to build a castle or to go out and get resources to collect food. You're just essentially keeping your hunger bar as full as you can so that you don't need to stop running.
And you see this a lot in video games. If there's not a reason for the player not to jump while they're walking, they will jump while they're walking. Or if it makes them move infinitesimally smaller, faster I should say, they will jump repeatedly. So it's like, you don't want to limit the player and say they can't do those things and that it's not valuable, because that's not fun. But if you want to push them into a more immersive style of play, then you just have to make those options okay, but other options better.
Well, and for a survival game, it just makes sense, because most people who are dropped into a zombie survival world will maybe be able to run for like 15 minutes before like they get too tired to do that and just need to walk, right? And even if they could run longer, they might not want to, because if you're running longer, well, then you're just running to more places that will accumulate more threats, and then it'll just get worse for you anyway. And so let me ask this, unless there's like some huge spoiler detail here, are there times in the game where you should run?
Yes, but it's so, I'd say what's really fascinating. So we've talked a lot about Minecraft, and I love mentioning Minecraft because these are both games developed through Java. Yes, they're both games developed through Java. They're both survival. They're both indie. They started indie titles.
Enter the Backroom is going to be on this list too.
They actually have a lot. They have a lot in common. They have like a startling amount in common. What was I gonna say? So it's one of those things. So Minecraft, we talked about in the past, just in the conversations, is so intrinsically motivated. It's about, you get into the world, it's like, what can I build? And that's a really fun type of game to play if you're that type of person. It's like you just have this total freedom to morph the game world to your desired fit. You just have to put in the work to get the resources. And usually the work you do getting tools and stuff is just to make the building more efficient, less arduous. That way you're not farming coal and stone for your castle with a stone pickaxe. Right? You wanted that to go quicker. And that's a really fun gameplay loop for some people. But I find I really enjoy problem solving. And I think where Minecraft is probably like almost the epitome of that absolute creative freedom, I think Project Zomboid is the absolute epitome of just presenting you constantly with problems that you have to solve. It's less about a creative experience and more about this like, every single time you think you're good, you think you've done it, and you think you've gotten to a place where you're safe and you're good to go, you're not. Just for example, I just had a moment I absolutely adore. I went to the edge of town where I spawned, found a house with a bunch of weapons and some food, and I was chilling. And in the game, you can slowly work on your fitness. And I started with an unfit character to get some points of character creation. And so I was doing burpees in the corner of the room, watching TV to grind stats. It's like, I was looked up, that's like what you're supposed to do whenever you get to a safe spot. So I did burpees for an hour, right? And my character simulates it, is absolutely completely exhausted, in agonizing physical pain from the soreness from the burpees I've been having him do for the past 4 days. Right? I'm like, you gotta keep going. I think I'm safe. And I'm about to lay down for the night, completely naked, because I take off the clothes so I don't sweat through them and have to clean them. All I have is my crowbar on my back, and I'm completely naked, and I see 3 zombies out the window. Ordinarily not a problem, if you're decent at the game. But suddenly, these 3 zombies, as a consequence of my own actions, were almost insurmountably difficult to kill. It took them like an hour to eventually defeat them.
Because you were so exhausted from the burpees.
Exactly. And it's just like, the game is constantly these situations. It's like, you may be really good at the game and survive months. It starts in July. You may survive months. You might build a base and have tons of food and stuff. But winter comes. And suddenly there's a whole other set of problems that you have to solve in relation to that. It's like the problems that the game presents to you are never truly out. Like, no matter what, you always have something you can be doing to improve your situation, just like it is in real life, which is so interesting to me. You know, it feels like a game that you can't... I've never before thought I'd be so invested in a game that you can't win or get to... Like, you can theoretically get to a state where you're self-sustainable, impervious to zombies, and perfectly fine, but not really, if you know what I mean. It's like, it's never truly 100%. And there's always that niggling sense in the back of your brain that something's going to go wrong. It's so good.
Well, and what I love about the game is how little attention it pays to the end. Much like Minecraft, and much like my game, actually. Like, lots of connections here. But, like, I love how you said it presents itself at the beginning. It's like, this is a story of how you died. And I'm like, that's really cool, because technically, any game that you play, you know, you could get to, like, a win screen eventually, but if it's a survival game, well, you're not really playing it till you win. You don't win at life, you just do it till you die, right? And so it sounds like you said, it's taking the idea of being a survival game and just extending it as far as it can, and really, really making the player feel as though they are living through a character and, you know, living a life, you know, in some kind of world, in this case, a zombie apocalypse. And that does sound really fascinating. Like, one thing about Minecraft that I've heard that people will criticize is once you get all the tools that you need, nothing's really a threat. You can just kind of manipulate everything so that you never really face any problems again beyond ones that you impose on yourself. Which is fine, depending on the kind of player you are. But I've seen a lot of people asking for things like natural disasters, or for winter to have like a certain effect where you have to like have a warm shelter, not just some random thing that you built, and stuff like that. And while I think at this point Minecraft's kind of too deep into development to implement huge systems like that, it would be really cool to see some similar kind of sandbox game where like there's some kind of, you know, there's more dynamic natural things happening to you. You're being confronted with things that you regularly have to address, things that change your play style not because you chose, but because it's just how the game works. Because in Minecraft, like with the deep dark and stuff, you can just avoid that and you never have to change your play style at all. But it sounds like in this Project Zomboid game, like your playstyle has to regularly adapt to what's going on around you.
That's what's so interesting. You can't play. You have to play like it's one of those games that just like over the course of 10 years of development, once again, has so perfectly encapsulated its goals. It's like whenever you are constantly having to feed yourself, and then your clothes is breaking down, so you have to tailor it. You know, and all this, so many situations where just like you are like so deeply immersed in a top-down game. But on what you said in Minecraft, I don't think it needs to be that type of game.
It doesn't.
You know?
Yeah, it doesn't need to be that type of game. Yeah.
You know, like I used to think it did, but that was before I kind of like. Honestly, my thoughts have really because I've been playing Minecraft and Zomboid at the same time. You see, like Zomboid is that game. You know, there are other games out there that encapsulate that, and I think Minecraft is beautiful because its premises, I think, are baked in the creativity of its players. You know, I think that whenever I look at Minecraft players and people who religiously play Minecraft, like I see a specific type of person. You know, the people who love to build awesome things, you know, and mess with the code to make their own game modes and shit like that. You know, you see a lot of those similarities in Minecraft players, and they really love going in that direction. And because, like, it's just like Minecraft, I think the original premise that Notch probably thought of whenever he made the game, he was like, okay, procedurally generated map. And everything came from there. Whereas Zomboid was like, can we immerse the player in a zombie apocalypse? You know? And what's really interesting about the development of Zomboid is that right now, so it's on build 41. They're releasing build 42. And build 42 is going to feature, their stated goal for the update is to upgrade the crafting system to a point where if you were dropped in the middle of a map in the woods without any zombies present, could you use the crafting system to develop an early medieval society? Which is like such a like batshit crazy goal to stick on top of a zombie game, and I love it to death.
That does sound awesome.
Yeah,
yeah.
It
makes sense too.
It does, because like they are just exploring in the same way Minecraft I think has, maybe with less direction because they got bought by a major studio and had less of like, because one thing I love about indie studios is they have so much creative control.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes a long ass time to get the product that they're looking to make, but whenever they do get there, it's so sweet compared to the deadlines and the corporate interests of a major. Like, they have more resources for sure, but they also have more. They're less avant-garde in their decisions. Like, I don't think a game like Project Zomboid would have ever been released by like a major studio. You know, this game where it's like stupidly difficult and ultra realistic and that sort of thing. But I was making a point before that.
You're making a point about... What were you making a point about? About games just being what they are. They don't like need to be another game.
Yeah, and it's like, I think, even though like that sounds kind of off the wall, this crafting system they're implementing, it also just kind of fits because they've wanted to explore that notion of what a zombie apocalypse is to its absolute peak, and that means what happens after, you know, players loot every single item on the map. What happens whenever human beings loot everything? What do? Well, humanity, those who are immune or survived, would revert to like a lower tech society, not based around looting, but based around farming and blacksmithing and that sort of stuff. It'd be like the post-apocalypse. I think Minecraft, because I do want to talk about Minecraft's development too. It's like, I think that they've had released a bunch of updates recently, especially the cave update, that really have, like, just like chef's kiss, right? But I think that something that Minecraft does, which is I think sometimes frustrating to players, it's like they are always innovating like accessory systems. It's like I think people are hungry for, you know, these core systems to be developed, because I think the idea behind Minecraft is like, if it works, don't break it. But like I feel like people are eager, and I think mods kind of show this, to have like just some innovation, some multiplication of that core gameplay loop, rather than all these like the villagers, you know, and all that sort of stuff. And I think that like the cave update was that.
Yeah.
And so was the combat update and that sort of stuff. But I think that they do that sparingly.
No, I agree. And like you said, a lot of that I think is just risk management, because especially in the more corporate world, like risk management is the biggest thing. Like, right, you have a lot of people on your hands, a lot of resources on your hands, but that means there's a lot at stake. And so the more you can reduce risk, the better. And so it's all about balancing, okay, how much risk can we take on? Because you have to innovate in some way. You have to take some amount of risk, because then you're risking people not caring about your game because it's too safe, right? So it's all about finding that balance. And especially with Minecraft, I think you're definitely right that there's been a pattern of updates. At least there was a pattern of updates for a while, where they were adding things that are nice, but they're all accessory systems, things that you can ignore, and then the game feels no different. Like the archaeology stuff, I quite like going to the trail ruins and uncovering the shards and getting the armor trims and stuff like that. I think it's very fascinating, and I like kind of building in my mind like a story for whatever I find out in the world. But you know, that's like a 1 hour excursion, and then I just go back to the main gameplay loop and like build my bases or my villages and, you know, stuff like that. Armor trims I think are very interesting, because I've seen a lot of people talking about that, and in a similar way that you have creative freedom over, you know, how your world looks. Now you kind of have a bit more creative freedom over how you as a player look beyond your skin, and you unlock that by engaging with the world. And I think that's pretty interesting as a start. I think it could be expanded on a lot more. But like the armor trims, when they first announced that, I was like,
yeah, that's pretty sick. Yeah, I think I like them a lot too.
Yeah. Well, and another big problem that we would run into on servers is like once everyone has like full diamond or full netherite after the nether update, everyone looks the same. It's like you have to see their face to make sure it's them. And even if you can see their face, if we have similar skins, it's like who's who. But now, like, I instantly look at my friend and I'm like, you have netherite armor with a gold trim on this part and this part, and then a different gold trim on this part and this part. That's Brian.
Yeah.
Right? I think it's so fascinating to have that availability there. And like I saw some people commenting online about how they feel like they can express themselves just a little bit more with stuff like that. And another thing I love that they did recently, this is a totally unrelated thing, but signs, you can finally right-click them to edit the text on signs. And they're dual-sided now, which is sick. They didn't have to do that, but they did, and I love it. Actually, no. I can tie this back in. Things like signs, I think, are very fascinating. Like, the sign block is, like, one of the most interesting things in Minecraft, I think, because it has text. Right. Nothing else in the game really has text. Like, sure, you can like build giant like statues of letters if you really want to, but signs, you can annotate your builds and express things non-visually, which I think is very interesting because a lot of the time I try to find ways to express things in my builds purely with visuals, and I've been trying to hone that more and more. And so the sign block's very interesting because it just kind of changes how you can express things. Like you could just build a normal house, or you could like build a house and fill it with signs describing what every room is, which no one would probably want to do, but some people might enjoy it. And like with map makers, they would do that all the time with signs, especially in old days where like you didn't have command blocks that could make text appear in your on your screen. You literally just looked at the signs for like people's dialogue and stuff, and I think that's very fascinating.
It is really interesting. It's like, I think whenever people get into a sandbox game of any variety, like, there are certain games that click better with different types of people, but I think people who, get into Minecraft are like, I think as soon as you play Minecraft for the first time, you play the gameplay loop, you get diamond, maybe you enchant it, and then you're like, what's next? And then the game is meant, and it's very good at helping you make your own fun. And I think that anything that is conducive to the creativity of the player is like very good for the fun of the game. Like, I remember that. I remember watching videos of like sign dialogue on venture maps. It's just like, oh, where we have gone from there.
Yeah.
It's like I remember Hypixel not being nearly as advanced as it was, or these Minecraft servers with all these mini games and all the coding that goes into them. It's very interesting how, because like sometimes Minecraft can feel like a limited tool. Like it just feels a little constricting with its core stuff. And then you see what people can do, and you're like, oh wait, never mind.
That's on me.
Yeah, it's like, it's one of those games where we're very truly kind of the world's your oyster. Even when it comes to replicating, say, even blocks that aren't in game, like there's no furniture, right? There's beds, but and bookshelves and certain other pieces, but there's not really any like chairs or stuff like that. But there's so many ways that builders have found to make that happen, to make furniture, to make the house come to life on the inside.
Yeah, and like the developers have actually talked about that, and they're like, well, that's why I'm not going to add furniture, because we want players to do that. Because like gameplay wise, it wouldn't really serve a purpose. Like, oh, you right click to sit in it. Great. Why would you do that, right? Why would you just like sit there? If you really want to sit there, you can just stop moving, right? You don't need a feature that stops you from moving. That's just kind of weird. And so it's very interesting how I guess the word I'm looking for is conservative Mojang is when it comes to like adding things that truly add to the game.
Yeah, it's
well, and a lot of times people like, complain about things like, oh, they just added like a new wood type, or they just added like a bunch of random blocks, and I'm like, okay, when the core mechanic of the game is building, adding new blocks is just adding like infinitely more permutations of things you can make.
Mm-hmm.
Like just having new textures to work with, and new color palettes and stuff, I think is really fascinating. And so the more you spend that, the better, I'd say. Because adding a dungeon to the game, adding a new structure, it might like help with the storytelling aspect. It might help with extrinsic motivation because it gives you something to do. But once you've done it once, you don't really need to do it again.
See, making games that are extrinsically motivated usually means the game is less replayable. Minecraft is theoretically infinitely replayable. It's like, I want to build a castle this time, I want to build a restaurant this time, so on and so forth. But like, how do you make that, back to Zomboid, how do you make a game that's infinitely replayable extrinsically? And it's because you have to make a game based around situations rather than outcomes.
Yes, I think that's a very good way of putting it.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, because theoretically the best way to play Zomboid, and theoretically I guess you could say the best optimal way to play the survival mode of Minecraft, is to build a farm, to get away from it all, and to go to sleep every night, and just to eat food.
Yeah.
And not die. But like, you have to have these, in Minecraft you have these things, like the motivation to not do that is, oh, you want to build, you want to be creative, you want to go get blocks. Like, Randy on my server wants nether quartz for her construct. She wouldn't go to the nether otherwise, but she wants nether quartz. So she's constantly going in there to mine it. And same with Zomboid, it's like, but Zomboid is different, it's extrinsically motivated because you can't build, at least in the early game, a farm that is infinitely sustainable and will keep you alive forever. You have to, like, you may think you have a lot of food, but you really have 2 days worth of food. if you ration it. So then you have to go to the supermarket. Oh, but the supermarket's not... You can't go there. There's too many zombies. So you have to go to the hardware store to get weapons. Oh, no. A zombie surprised you in the bathroom. You got bitten. You're dead. You know, that's what's... It's like... The infinite permutations are from the presence and the, like, oppression of your character's real-life needs on you. Minecraft, you can pretty much ignore the hunger bar once you get a farm set up.
Yeah.
You know? But you can never do that in Zomboid. But I wouldn't want Minecraft to do that.
No, exactly. And like when this most recent update came out, Trails and Tales, it was very controversial because it felt like half the community loved it, and the other half hated it with a burning passion.
Why?
Well, and I'll tell you why. It's because they said that, oh, they're adding all these useless things. Why don't they add more bosses? Why don't they add more, biomes? Why?
Just what we're discussing.
Exactly what we're discussing. Well, and like, well, why don't they add more like materials to make armor with, or more progression with your character? And it's like, if you want a survival game where you get to build a lot of stuff and defeat a lot of bosses, play Terraria, right? If you really just want to focus on the bosses and combat, play Elden Ring. They're and like the developers have called out some people on this because they want to try and keep in touch with the community and make it clear what their goals as developers are, which I think is smart. It's not them just trying to shamefully defend themselves and like, oh no, it's good because I said so.
We have reasons for doing what we're doing.
Exactly, and so they're trying to convey that. And one of the biggest things that they've been trying to make clear recently is that Minecraft has a core and they want to stick to that core and they don't want to change it into something else. They don't, because say they add like a ton of new bosses. Okay, great, but why do that when so many other games do it way better? Because they have better combat systems. They have the capability to have much more unique dungeons and they have more enemies that can plague those dungeons and stuff like that, and more systems that the player can interact with while they're going through those dungeons. It's like, I love me some new structures and I love me some new enemies to fight and stuff. So like if they add that to Minecraft, I'm cool with that. But if it doesn't enhance one of the cores of Minecraft, whether that be building or exploring, then why do it? I think ocean monuments are one of the most interesting things ever added to Minecraft because you just had these empty oceans that were only there to boat across. That's all you would do with those. And then 1.8 comes around and they add ocean monuments. And now suddenly it's like, well, while you're boating, you might find something that you might want to go into. But most likely you're going to have to do a lot of preparing for that. So for the first time in Minecraft history, there's a reason to specifically seek out oceans. Before they were just obstacles. But then they added these ocean monuments, and now there's a reason to go there. And what do you get out of it? For the most part, new building blocks. The prismarine stuff. That's about all you really get out of it. Because you can get 8 blocks of gold from those things. You can get like sea lanterns and stuff. But other than that, like there's not really a reason to go on. But still, it's an extrinsic thing that increases the intrinsic potential of the game because you get new building blocks. And I love the prismarine blocks. I think they look really nice, especially dark prismarine, that nice, really dark greenish blue color. I love it.
I will comment on that because I think that I agree with you, and I think that, but I think that maybe the design team's decision to stick to safe innovations is not because they think that the core of Minecraft is perfect, but more because of that corporate risk-taking behavior. Because, like, I think of, they make a lot of money off the game. But Minecraft's model is you buy it, and then maybe you have a Realm subscription to play with your friends, but, like, after that, they don't get any more money from you. So how do they make their money? They make it from branding. All the Minecraft, like, stuff out there, all the Minecraft merch. They probably make fucking buku dollars off. Like, how many kids have you seen on Creeper t-shirts?
I mean, they made a lot of money off of me. I have plenty of Minecraft merch.
Yeah, no, yeah. And, like, how do you have merch? You have an identifiable brand. Like, you have things that people can latch onto, images that you can latch onto. Like, I remember watching a video about how Netherite's a big deal because suddenly, like, Diamond is the best tool in Minecraft. That's the way it is. Right? That iconic blue tool color. Like, there are so many kids out there, and me included, I had a diamond sword. A little diamond foam sword.
Yeah.
And pickaxe or whatever it was. And it's like, okay, so is Netherite now going to be the new brand icon? And it still kind of isn't. Because of how they ended, because of how they added it. They added a new tier up that wasn't so much better as to be debilitating. They really played it safe, right? They didn't want Netherite to be outright better than Diamond. They want it to be an upgrade, but to be super hard to get so that most players wouldn't have the patience to go get a full set of it, and that sort of thing. And going to Zomboid, how does Zomboid do it? Well, they're a small indie game. Their only goal is to sell their game and have a good game. They're not worried about branding because their brand is very generic, you know? It's like set in Kentucky in the 90s, and it's zombies. Like, there's not much branding you could do there. So it's like, what do? Well, they have 3 difficulty options in terms of how you can play the game that are generic and preset. Apocalypse, which is like kind of like what they're recommended, or like the difficulty they like to design around the most. Really high zombie count, you're really weak, more based around stealth, you don't want to take every single fight. Survivor, more fighting based. Builder, basically easy mode. You start with items, less zombies, they're easy to kill. And then the one that's most interesting to me is Sandbox. Sandbox allows you to adjust basically every setting in the game. You could play Project Zomboid and turn off the zombies. You could literally just turn them off. Like, if you wanted to, you didn't want to play Zomboid with zombies, you just turn. They don't spawn. There's no zombie apocalypse. It's just a survival game at that point. You're gathering food and isolation, right? Preparing for the winter. And what's so interesting to me about that is that whenever you include mods, like, theoretically, every single addition they add to the game, you could just ignore. You could just do whatever you want. And I think possibly something like that would be really good for Minecraft the game. But a reason that they would never implement such an optional tweaking thing is because every addition they have to the game is an addition to the brand, right? Why are they so hesitant to add new bosses? It's because if they add a new boss, that if it doesn't go over well, then they can't sell plushies of that boss. They can't sell Ender Dragon plushies. They can't sell that sort of thing. They can't sell Ender Dragon eggs to people, and that's what the corporate side is thinking. I'll bet you there are people on Mojang who want to add that sort of stuff. Because they recognize that players, because of the way Minecraft works, would never have to interact with it. Right? You could download 1,000 boss mods and not fight a single one of them. It's such an interesting... Game development is so interesting, the way it happens. There's a video I want to watch from the Project Zomboid dev team called How Not to Develop a Game. I'm not sure what it's about. I haven't seen it, but I really want to watch it. They're like a presentation at a game expo in Europe. And they just... Because apparently, 10 years of development, right? Starting with one person, turning into a team. I'm sure there have been all sorts of hiccups. I'm really fascinated to watch it and see what they say about their process.
Yeah. No, I would love to see something like that, because I could also make a video in a similar vein of how not to develop a game. But, like, that's just what's so valuable about, going out and doing these big old projects and making those mistakes. And related to video games, this is actually something that I watched this week. So Team Fortress 2, specifically, Source Filmmaker Team Fortress 2, where like people will use all the models from Team Fortress 2 to make these weird little animations and stuff. These people made a full film in Team Fortress 2. It's a psychological horror film called Emesis Blue, and it's crazy how much effort they put into that thing. Like, it's obviously like made in Source Filmmaker, but like, it's got voice acting, it's got great sound design in my opinion, and it's like an hour and 48 minutes, I want to say, something around there. And it's so interesting because I watched that, and then later I watched like a 2-hour video essay unpacking all of it. And there's so many references to films and so many like metaphors in it, and there's so many layers to it that it's insane how much thought they put into it. And without spoiling it, basically it starts off with it takes the mechanic of the respawn.
I love things that play around at the respawn,
because in Team Fortress 2, what happens? Well, you die, and you're just waiting there to respawn. You're like, man, this is taking forever. It's so boring. And like 20 seconds later, you respawn. You're good to go. Go out there. In Emesis Blue, it all hinges on the invention of the respawn machine, which can take the mercenaries and respawn them after they die. But the respawn machine isn't perfect. It messes up. What happens when it messes up? What does it mean to respawn? What are the implications of that? Because at least in this film, I think it's quite evident that people have souls. And so what happens with that? And so throughout the film, you kind of see the effects of it. And I don't want to spoil it, because I highly recommend just watching it when you have the free time. But it's just so cool how, people made this film with a very dorky, janky piece of software, with characters and models and set pieces from a video game about a mechanic from a video game. I saw some comments in the description, and I thought some of them were funny, because one comment read, "I bet the creators of this film were playing Team Fortress 2, and they were getting sick of how long it took to respawn, and decided to make a whole movie just about that." And I could easily believe that that's what it was. That's how it started, because, you know, jokingly, like, when you're playing like a team fighting game like that, and you have to wait to respawn, like, you just want to jump back into the action, and so it feels like an eternity. Well, in the film, again, I'm trying to tread on, you know, thin ice here without, you know, spoiling the whole thing, but one of the effects of the respawn machine when it goes wrong is that it feels like an eternity when you're trying to respawn. Like, we don't know how long, but it comes off like centuries, maybe even millennia of just waiting with yourself. And who knows, like, what they see on the other side while they're waiting to respawn. We don't know. And a lot of it, according to the video essay I watched, was based off of Stephen King's The Jaunt. Have you ever read that?
No.
Are you okay if I just spoil it?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so in The Jaunt, teleportation is a thing, right? It's real, it's good, it's as common as
I forget
flying is today.
I'm just gonna reference a philosophical. I forget what they're called, but I forget. It's Aristotle's ship. Is it something? The ship of
The ship of Theseus.
Theseus.
Theseus, yeah.
You know, like if you take apart a ship, every nail and every plank, and put it back together, or rather, if you replace every piece over time, is it the same ship?
Oh, are you thinking about the current theory of like potential teleportation, where like you just like you use like superposition or something to like break apart someone's atoms and then reassemble them somewhere else?
Mm-hmm.
I see what you mean. That is
that the same person? Is the question, right?
Yeah.
Is that something that is played around with?
In this story, no, but that's interesting because that's a whole other tangent. But in this story, you just do it, right? You know, it works. They don't explain how it works. But when they were testing teleportation with lab rats, they realized that, you know, lab rats that came out on the other side would just like convulse and die. But if the rats were asleep, they would come out on the other side just fine. And so when they extend that to humans, they just put, you know, little gas masks on you to put you to sleep, and then you come out on the other side and you've teleported. Congratulations. In this story, there's a family going on a vacation, like teleporting, I think it's like to Mars or something, and they're getting ready to teleport, and their son mischievously is just like, I'm going to pretend to fall asleep because they haven't started my gas mask yet, so I'm just going to pretend like I'm already asleep. And for whatever reason, the people who are supposed to run the gas to the mask, maybe the gas just wasn't working or something, but the boy pretends to fall asleep. He doesn't actually. The whole family teleports, right? All the other family members wake up, and they wake up to see their son, whose skin is very weak and brittle and like gray, his hair snow white, and he's screaming and raving about you don't know where I've just been. It's longer than you think. You don't know where I've just been. It's longer than you think. And like he's just going crazy. And then immediately he just starts like writhing in pain, and he rips his own eyes out and just keeps screaming at his parents while they scream back about how it's longer than you think. It's eternity in there. It's longer than you think. Over and over and over again. And then, like, that's essentially the story.
It's like I just had it. Stanley Parable, Deluxe.
Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe.
You remember that part with the narrator where you press the button and
yes.
fast forward?
No, it's very much like that. And like the narrator of this video essay says, you know, in essence, eternal life and eternally dying, like over and over again, are the same thing, in a sense, right? So, and like another one of the comments on their video said that like what they really appreciate is some old like phrase or quote that living forever is just dying forever with another name, which I think is fascinating to think about because like I saw like a TED Ed video once about like, well, what if you did live forever? And it started talking about how like over time you would accumulate scars that would never go away. You would break bones that you can never replace. Things in your body would fail, but you would just keep living no matter what. And then it begs the question, it's like, okay, well, like, if say your brain fails but you can't die, then do you live? Or does that mean your brain can't fail? Or, like, what part of you being immortal Like, how does that, supersede over like natural processes and physical processes? And then you have to consider, like, where is the boundary between the physical and the non-physical, or is there a boundary? Is there a non-physical? And then it gets like really existentialist really fast. And so anyway, as I was watching the Emesis Blue film itself, it gets more horrifying as it goes on. Not only because like it starts playing on deeper and deeper themes, but because the themes that have already been presented just have more time to cook in your brain. And so as you see them realized more and more, you're just like, it's scary.
I remember the other day, I was watching a video about the Zomboid iceberg, mostly trying to get tips on how to play. It's like, you start on like what everyone knows, like how the iceberg meme works. And like halfway through it, so the title screen is what looks to be a man behind a barricade in a room, holding his wife, who has a crutch next to her. So you assume the wife is like ailing or sick, and the man's holding her and consoling her. But if you stay on the main menu screen long enough, there'll be a flash of lightning, and the dark parts will be revealed, and it'll be revealed that the man is actually a zombie eating the face off of his wife. Right? Whenever I saw that, I'm like, okay, that's whatever. And I was going to sleep that night, and I'm like, oh my god. And I was told, like I said earlier, I may have said this to somebody else actually. So those two people were actually in the original alpha version 10 years ago. There was a tutorial that had a little bit of a story to it, and you played as a man trying to protect his wife who was ailing during the zombie apocalypse. And it ends by you getting bitten, and you beg your wife to kill you. You hand her a gun and you beg her to kill you because you're so weak after having fought off with some zombies that you physically can't do it yourself. And you're afraid that you'll turn and eat her. But she doesn't.
No.
And that's what happens. And like, I was going to sleep that night, I was thinking about both those things, and I'm like, oh my god, that is actually just so fucked up. Sometimes whenever those themes have time to sit in your brain for a while, it's not until later that they really fire, and you're like, because you start running through the implications of all these things, and how many stories like that you would see on repeat in situations like that. Because I think what I find so interesting about Immortality too, discussing Immortality, that's not something people have quested for. Like, people literally came to the New World from Europe to find the Fountain of Youth.
Yeah.
And authors, ever since they've been able to write, have been questioning what that immortality would look like. And many people have said immortality is a curse, dying gives life meaning. But then I've heard the exact opposite. I know you watched GCP, Gray?
Yeah.
Have you seen his video about the same concept about reaching immortality, about don't consign yourself to death because we're maybe close to finding a way out, so to speak? His theory was, and have you seen his video of the dragon?
The dragon, no.
Oh, it's like a narrative about, because I think he's anti-death. Like, he's anti this notion that, death is something we should just learn to accept and that we should fight against it. And there's just really interesting dichotomy between the two things, because I think that, you could argue very well that death is something that should be fought against, that you should at all costs attempt to stave it off. And then there's other parts of me that's like, that acknowledges the points that these, writers have made over the centuries. It's like, is it worth it? And there really isn't a proper answer, because we don't know anyone who's fucking immortal. You know what I mean? So interesting. And we got here from game design.
Well, and then something that makes me wonder is, like, Christians believe that suicide is wrong, because at that point you are going against God's will for your life, and you're kind of like removing yourself from having to do something that would either benefit those around you or benefit yourself by connecting you to God. Do I believe people who commit suicide go to hell? I have no clue. I'm going to be honest. A lot of people would say, oh, yes, they do. I'm like, God's the master of the gray areas. What if they committed suicide because they had Alzheimer's? I'm not going to lie. If I was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I would be asked to be killed. Because at that point, I would feel like I was essentially becoming a zombie with no hope of, regaining myself. And I wouldn't want my loved ones to see me in a constantly deteriorating state.
So you're kind of in a certain, because in the Netherlands, voluntary euthanasia is what that's called.
Yeah.
Very, very controversial topic. It's like if you're diagnosed with like stage 4 terminal cancer, and you have a month to live, or stuff of that nature. I have a really interesting book I've loaned out to Elijah. I wonder if he's reading it. About James Williams. I forget the guy's name. I always do because it's so generic. But he was like the founder of American psychology and philosophy, and he wrote about the escape hatch, and about how for some people, having the ability to escape if they ever lose control of their life is so valuable, even if they never plan to actually utilize it or never can utilize it. Being able to say, well, I don't want my family to see me that way, I can do that, is more valuable than the actual act itself. Because he was, interestingly enough, a theist. He grew up a theist, and he grew up reading Marcus Aurelius and believing that he was all humans were special and had their purpose. And then, could you imagine being alive whenever Darwin dropped? Right? It's like having to grapple with this totally new worldview that was just brand spanking new, and being a scientific brain at that time who was like, I'm always going to be on the cutting edge of everything. And then having that, being a theist and seeing that happen, you're like, how do you grapple with that? Because to him it seemed like I think the way he put it was a chain of events. I'm a part of a chain of events. Everything before me has had a cause and effect, and I'm only a member of that chain of cause and effect, and I have no impact on that. It was his logical conclusion. And I could easily see about how, like, if I had to grapple with that at that time, I'd be like, oh my, that's you know, because I guess it's like Darwin, and the debate between Darwin and classical theists is more tired and talked out, and it's like I have found a reconciliation between the two, but I think that it'd be really interesting to exist at a time where there certainly was not going to be a reconciliation between the two, you know.
And the more I've thought about that particular topic, now that you brought up Darwin, as we talk through these, and I think I've finally landed on like a new view that I think there's a very good chance that evolution did occur, because we have so much data that backs that up, and like we could be writing our own narrative into it. There could always be things about the past that we're just wrong about.
Yeah.
Because the past is the past.
Yeah.
We weren't there to record it, so who knows? But
prehistory.
But when we have a lot of evidence that suggests that, it's like, there's no... I have to ask myself, is there a reason to not believe, the evidence? Or believe our current conclusions about the evidence? And really, no, there's not. Just like there's no necessary reason to throw your Bibles out the window when we find out that the sun's at the center of the solar system.
Exactly.
Right?
It's like... In the same way that, like, if God is so far beyond our ken, then, like, he could make all this shit.
Yeah.
It's like the Swiss watch theory.
So, yeah, and like now at this point, like a lot of Christians, and this YouTuber that I really want you to watch, I mentioned him before, I Am Begar, I don't know how you pronounce his name, but he made a video. He's Catholic, and he made a video about some big questions about science and stuff. And one thing that he says right out the gate is, first of all, I believe that the sun's at the center of the solar system. I believe in evolution with an asterisk. And he lists a couple other things that he believes that some Christians just refuse to. He believes that the Earth is round. I think that's another thing he says. And the asterisk that he has on evolution is that, of course, evolution could have easily taken place. And in fact, the way that creation is described in the Bible, with how vague it is, piece it together, right? It could just be describing something very similar to our current theory of evolution.
Yeah.
Because it talks about, well, first there are things in the sea, and some of those things went on land, and some of those things went to the air. And it's like, okay, yeah, and then you had animals, and then humans came along, like, after all that. And, like...
That's very darn close.
Very darn close. Yeah, well, and the thing is, like, it's so vague, and it's so brief in the Bible when it mentions the days of creation, I think because that doesn't do anything to help us come closer to God. It's just that, arbitrary knowledge of, well, how did things begin? Because we didn't need to be there. That has no effect on us. And that's why I think, I'm so willing to say that, the whole chain of cause and effect that led to me being here doesn't matter. Because I don't need to know that to live a happy and fulfilling life in which I feel as though I have free will.
That's pretty much where I'm at, too. I think those people who were alive at that time, though, because, I think there has always been in a theist mind, I call it like a reactionary bent. It's like, well, I believe in this text. I want to believe in that text above all things. And I think what's so interesting is, agreeing, if I were to, agree with their premise for the sake of this point, that, all writers of the Bible, for example, were divinely inspired and wrote it perfectly, they were still products of their time. It's like, I'm sure God wouldn't have been like, so there was a Big Bang where
Exactly.
the fundamental forces of the universe, it was so hot, he's just sitting there like trying to explain science, and the guy's like, I want to go milk my cow.
Well, and you bring up something interesting, because, you talk about these beliefs that we hold close to our hearts, and then sometimes I feel as though when something new comes out about the state of our universe that we weren't expecting, or we find some unexpected connection between things, people are so quick to say, especially theists are so quick to say, oh no, that can't be that way. They don't say that because they think that it violates... Well, no, they are saying that because they think it violates their religion, but they only think it violates their religion because they've so intimately attached their worldview to their religion, when really your worldview is not just your religion. It's made up of lots of other things. And so, like, that happens in politics all the time, right? Well, people will make political decisions based off their religion, and I'm like, well, it's not always good.
Interesting enough, something to discuss too. It's like, in the same way that theists dismiss science out of hand sometimes because it's so close to their worldview, people who are like, science is a religion in a major way.
Yeah.
Like I personally can, like, I'm not going to say that evolution happened but there was no God, because that is a statement that I can't possibly back up with any sort of evidence. I can't. It's so, this conversation is always so interesting, because as an agnostic theist, I'm never gonna be like, yeah, God doesn't exist because I have proof. And I think that there are some fairly well-reasoned and logical, like, contradictions of the existence of an omnipotent God that you can say. I think to be human is to be contradictory. To experience life is to be contradictory. And I quote Taryn all the time now. It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
But
like, to be here in the first place,
it's like contradictions are only there because we don't understand, and more likely than not, we will never truly, fully, entirely understand. So, kind of whenever you hear contradicting to your worldview, being able to not necessarily be like, that's correct, but being able to entertain it, and being able to, like, to put it, like, you have your accepted worldview, and then you have your in processing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Where you kind of work it out and reason it through before you attach it to what you believe. I think it's such a valuable skill to have.
Well, and that's why I've found myself doing so recently, and that's why I think I've become a stronger Christian, because I've been able to take pieces out of the things that were in the accepted pile or rejected pile, put them back into processing, and really just kind of, like, think about it some more, and reconsider it. Because, whether or not I believe in evolution, I can be a theist.
Yeah.
Whether or not I believe in flat Earth, I can be a theist, right? And so I have to make sure it's like, like a what's it called? Like an HR person doing an interview for a job. You might have a list of criteria for applicants, which decides what you accept and what you reject. But there will be tons of things on these applicants' applications that, don't have anything to do with your list of criteria, and so there's no need to reject them, even if it comes off to you as weird. Yeah. Like, let's say I was hiring someone, and there's this someone who is wanting to be a programmer at my company, and they're amazing, they're a prodigy, but they also happen to be a furry. I was like,
why was I thinking the same thing? That's so funny. I was literally thinking that. I was. It's like, that's so fucking funny, dude.
If they can do the job well, I might be tempted to reject them just because I'm like, well, that's weird. That's not the image I had in my head of the person I was going to hire. But, like, if they do a great job, and if they don't, like, cause anyone at the workplace to be uncomfortable, accept them.
Yeah.
That will help my company. There's no reason not to. Yeah. And much like with, like, evolution, even though it might come off as weird because it's not what I had in mind when I read the Bible, everyone has something in mind when they read the Bible. Everyone has something in mind when they read anything.
Yeah.
That's just how we are. We write narratives into things, and so trying to extract those and look at, what you need to believe, and then what you don't necessarily need to believe or not believe. Like, once you really start doing that, you can get on these new conclusions where it's like, well, here's what I think I believe. But I think the most beautiful thing is things can just be in processing forever. Like, Dave and I were talking about this last night as Christians, how to respond to LGBTQ issues, because while the Bible, depending on how you reinterpret it, says homosexuality is wrong, and I believe it makes itself clear enough. Some people say, oh, no, it's really talking about pedophilia, but there are several mentions of this thing that I of course, at the time, they had no word for homosexuality, but I think it's talking about something akin to that. Even though the Bible says it's wrong, I ask myself, well, why does God say it's wrong? Why does he not want that for us? Because almost every other sin that God mentions in the Bible is for our benefit. Things as obvious as murdering are wrong, and so it's clear why that should be a sin. But it's not as clear why homosexuality should be a sin, because I think it's perfectly possible for like a gay couple to be happy and to be Christian. So I asked myself, well, what's the harm in this? Why would God not want this for people? What's it doing? And a lot of theologians will say, oh, well, sexual deviancy, it's focusing on lust and desire and stuff. Well, it's like, well, straight couples can get overwhelmed by lust and desire, even if they're Christian, right? And so I have to ask myself, and Dave and I were talking about this, and we both kind of reached the conclusion that while we still believe it's wrong, we don't really know why it's wrong. We're just going to kind of take God's word for it, and because we can't really give a good reason for it being wrong, we are in no position to hold people in our lives like accountable or anything for being homosexual, because it's like there's no clear reason to me why it would be wrong. And I think that ultimately what matters most is this, as a Christian, is their connection with God and our connection with God, and harping on them for being LGBT is not going to bring them any closer to God, right? And so we reach this point where we decide to leave it in processing. Just leave it there. Like, we may never come to an answer as to why God has something against, being LGBT, beyond it being like just against his design. And then you have to ask, well, why is his design the way it is? But that's a whole other topic.
I think, I've tried to make this point before, and I know it's like, to a theist, I don't think it really, especially to something, to the Bible, it's like, because agreeing with the premise that humans were divinely inspired, I think is still impossible to ignore, like we agreed upon in terms of being able to explain the Big Bang and other complex, physical, theories of physics and the laws of physics to these people. Like, even though they're divinely inspired, I still think that if you're writing 100 pages, that maybe not every one of those 100 pages was written by God's hand, right? I feel as though there's always been a anti-homosexual bent in society, not necessarily because of any inherent wrongness, but because of because like what we've been discussing, of this difference in a worldview. It's like, I feel as though anti-homosexuality in the Bible and in ancient Sumer civilization and elsewhere is more a cultural thing. And I think the evidence of that is that if it truly would be against God's design to be homosexual, then say you look at ancient Mesoamerican civilization or ancient Roman civilization before the advent of Christianity, and you look at how the societies developed, and those people maybe weren't Christian, but they were children of God, because all humans is the idea. They all have souls, they all have the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, right? So it's like, why would they engage in these acts if they were wrong or against his design? And I don't necessarily think it's because of free will, because many people who are homosexual, most homosexuals, if not all of them, are that way because of birth. They're just born that way. So it's like, would God create something that was inherently sinful? In a way, yes, humans were that way, but I don't think he would create something so fundamental in the design of a person that they'd have to literally struggle against their physical nature.
Well, no, like that's in me, like porn, right? I have to resist their urge to watch porn. I'll be going to bed at night and be like, all of a sudden, bad thoughts start popping into my mind, and I have the temptation to pursue them and to visually engage with them and all that stuff, right? Something the Bible overwhelmingly supports is that humans are just by nature sinful, and sin isn't necessarily approaching evil. It's more about distancing yourself from God and kind of turning yourself to the things of this world and turning yourself to following your desires and your immediate passions and stuff. And so, and that's the one thing that David and I talked about. It's like, it was made and brought up in these circumstances that are completely out of my control to have these desires that I frankly don't want to have, and yet I have them, right? And I struggle against those, and sometimes I ask myself why. But so to me, that's not really a conflict of faith, and it's more like, as I said earlier, God's great at dealing with the grace. Like, if you're a homosexual and you genuinely say you're a man and you love another man with all your heart and you want to raise a family with them and dedicate your life to both them and Christ, God can work with that. I think God can work with that, or it's much more easy to see how God could work with that than how God could, say, work with Hitler, right? Which I know a big example. But I think that's the beauty of Christianity that is lost, unfortunately, for a lot of Christians, is that God is great at working with us despite our faults. And the point of being a Christian, well, one of the biggest points of being a Christian is loving each other despite those faults. As God would
I have a
love us.
question for you. Do you believe in circumcision?
In circumcision, I don't care. I'll say it. I'm circumcised.
Oh yeah, I mean, because
Yeah.
I was going to be circumcised if I wasn't born premature. What's so interesting about circumcision is that the Jewish do it for religious reasons. Some Christians do it for religious reasons, but not all.
My parent, really quick. My parents said they did it just because they were told that like it can get like infected or something, or like it can get gross.
So it's, and this is this is so fat. This is such a fascinating conversation because it's baked in theism. It's baked in culture. The thing is, there really isn't any conclusive evidence that having your foreskin makes you more likely to get infected unless you literally just don't clean yourself. And from experience, it's not very hard. So are there people out there who have gotten infections because they have it? It's not because they have it. It's because they're probably already going to get an infection anyway.
Yeah. Well, and
You know
that's
what I mean?
so interesting because like there are other things in the Bible like cutting,
Cutting
don't cut your beard.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, because
Did Jesus ever say that being gay was bad?
He did not, and that's a very interesting thing because like what apparently in the book of Leviticus God spoke against homosexuality, and then Paul in his letters was outlining like what a godly marriage looks like, and whenever he mentions homosexuality he mentions it alongside a ton of other sins, and what I think is so interesting about that is whenever he mentions homosexuality he usually mentions unnatural desires, ungodly desires. And that makes me wonder, it's like, if naturally from birth you have a certain kind of desire, so long as you also have the desire to pursue God, it's like, is there any harm in that? Because while I definitely think like, lust is one of the 7 deadly sins for a reason, chasing your desires more than you chase God is bad. Even if you're not Christian, just chasing every immediate desire that you have is bad. I think we could agree.
I think... And I do want to end it
really quick.
You finish your thought.
Yeah, but because I'm about to wrap it up, because the whole big thought here is because it's listed along all these other sins, I think there's a very easy case to be made that when Paul is saying these things in his letters, he's not specifically saying, "Oh yes, God does not want you to be gay." He's more saying, God doesn't want you to follow every immediate desire you have. Because that can lead you down rabbit holes. It's not that being gay is bad. It's not that being attracted to a man is bad. It's that following your attraction to a man, though for many it was seen as unnatural, could easily lead you into following other attractions and stuff that you have. Much like I have this what's the word I'm looking for? This impulse, this desire to watch things that will negatively affect my psychology.
So, a few things. I suppose my worldview, before even the discussion of theism or not, is baked into this notion of loving yourself, loving who you are. And I think this actually meshes rather well with theism, because loving who you are, and you may not do it all the time, but loving who you are is so important because it's what God made, if you are a theist. It's what you are, a divinely crafted thing, for whatever you may look like, whoever you may be. And I think what's really fascinating about the 7 deadly sins and about this godly manner, and whenever you discuss it, whenever it's brought up in conversation, it's like, Christians always have so much guilt. I've always had, it's like, why do you have so much guilt? It's because I have these urges and impulses and desires that I have been told are ungodly. And it's like, to me, virtue is a tightrope, and sin is the depth of a swimming pool. It's not the very top, because you will never always be able to stay on a tightrope. Even somebody who's perfectly amazing, awesome at it, you will fall off. And hating yourself whenever you fall off into the kiddie pool means you will end up in the depths, right? Embracing who you are on your average allows you to be better at reaching that tightrope of virtue and being able to walk it better. It's like, and I also think that when it comes to the cultural analysis of these habits and these behaviors, if you're looking at Paul was a Roman, right? He's the Roman?
Yeah, I think so.
He's the one who wrote the letters to the different churches.
Yeah.
What was Rome facing at the time? Rome had a big problem with cults, right? Because their major cult was the cult of the emperor. The emperor was a divine entity worshipping. Like, you don't worship him, but like he was like godly. Like there's a temple to Julius Caesar, because he ascended to godhood after he died or something. But there's all these cults all over the place in the Roman Empire. One of them's Christianity, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, other pre-established sects, but also other cults that engaged in what I would classify as generic cult behavior. You know, the orgies, the drugs, the sacrifice. Although, I mean, Roman cult, they sacrificed. But just those sort of behaviors, the generic behaviors. And I could see how you could do those to excess. Easily. What's it called? It's a cynic. There was a Cynic school of philosophy. Eat, drink, and be merry is derived from them. In contrast to the Stoic philosophy. Like, they're very different. And I think that perhaps Paul was trying to moderate those excesses, not of Christians, but of Romans in his dialogue. And I think it's really interesting. The reason I asked you, did Jesus say this, is because to me, the only thing that can be truly writ, if you're a Christian, as divine law, is those 10 Commandments, what Jesus said, and everything else is through the mouthbox of a human being.
And I do think that's a very valuable insight, because a lot of Christians, I think, struggle with that. And like, oh yes, every single word in this book relates to me. Like, well, no, that's not. It might be there to help you reach a greater understanding of the historical context, or it might be something that was useful to someone else. But not every single word is going to apply to you directly. And my understanding of LGBTQ stuff is I have no desire for that, so I need not even worry, about going down a path God doesn't want me to go down in that regard. But when it comes to how I approach other people, it's like, regardless of how I interpret it, I shouldn't, treat them any differently. And so that's why I'm so comfortable with my thoughts on, LGBT versus godliness being in my inner processing box and just staying there, because it doesn't really have an impact on how we treat others and how I live my life. And I really like how you said, like, perhaps Paul was just addressing a lot of the cults at the time around Rome, because that makes a lot of sense. Because a lot of things that were mentioned in like these lists of sins that Paul would warn these people about that he was writing to, so many of those were sins that you would see in cult-like behavior, and things that you saw way back when Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. Because I can definitely see how LGBT oftentimes is about love, but there's an inherent sexual bend to it as well, which isn't necessarily wrong. But what that does mean is, talk about sexual immorality and stuff is bound to come up if you take a theist angle. And you do have to start asking yourself, okay, what kind of desires are fine to chase, and what kind of desires aren't? Or what can desire turn into? Because I can easily see how a straight desire can become really bad, especially with pornography. You can start seeing women or men as objects. And things like that, and you could start craving that to the point where you can't focus on anything else. You could start, and this isn't even from pornography, you could literally just be in a 100% Christian marriage relationship, and you can get just so infatuated with your partner that like you can't think of anything else.
I do want to close on this discussion of pornography, because I've actually had a discussion recently with Elijah, as you know. This is anti-pornography movement that I think is rather large nowadays, and I think it's baked in this premise that pornography is activating something in men in particular that is not historically, like this is a new phenomenon. This access from an early age to pornography, and for certain people, 100%. Like, there are stories of people out there who cannot control it, who get addicted and that sort of thing. But like, the types of behaviors that we find so deplorable that we think pornography spawns are not new. The type of people who would act upon their worst impulses in relation to those things, who view women as objects, are not going to do it more because of pornography. And a very interesting historical context I like to bring up every single time whenever it talks about the evil sexual nature of man is the sack of a city. In medieval times onwards, and basically everywhere, whenever you're taking a fortified settlement where there's walls, it usually requires months of miserable labor, constant risk of death, terrible dysentery and disease, until you finally break a hole in the wall, storm the city, or they surrender. If you storm the city, you fight for hours, sometimes in terrible weather conditions. You're absolutely exhausted. The fighting goes to the streets and then the keep. You're slaughtering tens, if not hundreds of men. And then what happens? Even in modern times, there's something called the Rape of Europe. The Soviet army, as they marched through Eastern Europe and into Germany, they raped thousands and tens of thousands of women that the advancing Russian army did out of revenge and out of this this very base instinct of depravity that happens whenever you have been killing men and fighting in such conditions for so long. And many German women in Berlin, as the the Soviet army was approaching, killed themselves. They jumped out of buildings and shit because they didn't want that to happen to them. Did pornography exist then? No. And perhaps it's one of those circumstances we're discussing where it was extreme circumstances, one of the biggest wars in human history. But this type of behavior is not new. Fighting your baser instincts is not new. And the type of people who do these things are not necessarily going to do them anyway, that's not what I'm saying, but have always done these things. I think it's less a conversation about the pornography industry ruining the morality of mankind, because I think that's too deeply steeped in this guilt culture, because those sort of bends have already been there. I think that's really interesting.
Earlier I was laughing when you said porn activates something in people, and I was thinking of just a sleeper agent who sees just the right video and suddenly becomes 10 times stronger or something.
And all jokes aside, though, it is super interesting. I've heard people talk about I'll hop on, because I briefly I researched the No Fat movement. I'm like, oh, what's this all about? Should I feel bad about doing whatever it is I do? And I look it up, and I'm like, people online, they'll have no fat videos, and the comments will be filled with people saying, I feel stronger and healthier and more energetic. And you hop on to, you look up studies, and there's been a few studies about masturbation in men and what it does in pornography consumption. And there's no conclusive evidence that not masturbating leads to a higher quality of life. There's not really, and same with the consumption of pornography. Whenever it comes to, so people say, there are people who genuinely believe that holding your semen in physically empowers you. And actually, funnily enough, in the Hindu tradition, I believe that there are certain types of gurus who believe it's kind of like your life force, and they practice something called semen retention. The study
Yeah.
I read referenced it, and it leads to a 5% boost in testosterone or something. Right? It's not it really doesn't do a lot. There's a lot of cultural, a lot of social, and a lot of personal guilt that goes into this conversation that I think that ignoring leaves so much of the context out. You know what I mean?
I get what you're saying, yeah. And to quickly wrap it up, biologically, I don't think there would be very much impact. Like he said, 5% testosterone if you just don't.
And that's just a total number, because that's been a long time since I've read the study. But that's just an estimate, by the way.
My fear really is, I feel the more, it's like a sort of greed almost, because the more you feed it, the bigger it gets, right? And you have to be careful and do it in moderation. But then again, not everyone who drinks alcohol is an alcoholic.
It's one of those things, I think, because I totally understand what you're saying. And listen, I'm not being go watch pornography. I'm not advocating for it. I'm saying live whatever life makes you feel content.
Yeah.
Not viciously happy. Don't pursue happiness, and not upset and terrible. Don't pursue virtue until you don't realize you're drowning in the pool. Right? I think what I'm saying is the conversation around the consumption of it is baked in a lot of premises that I think don't necessarily support the conclusions of it.
Well, I get what you're saying. Even the Bible, it says, temptation is not a sin. In fact, being tempted and rising above that is virtuous in the eyes of God. And God, while he tests you, does admire those who can resist temptation and answer his call above the calls of the world, or the calls of Satan, or what have you. And so, I don't mind. While I do feel a bit of guilt sometimes just for having some of the desires and thoughts that pop into my mind sometimes, I love this quote that I heard from this one movie that it was this guy in the court case, and they were trying to find a motive for his actions. Not his motive for his actions. He was accusing someone of killing his wife, killing and raping his wife. Not wife, daughter. Sorry, killing someone of killing and raping his daughter, and they were trying to say, so is there any particular reason that you're accusing this black man of doing this? Could it perhaps be because your race is against him? And the man said, okay, when I look at him, you know what the first thing I think is? He's black. He's different than me. But it's not the first thought that counts. I shouldn't be ashamed of that, because it's the second, the third, the fourth. Those thoughts, those are the ones that matter. It's not about, what enters my mind that I can't control. It's about how I take that and transform it into something good that really matters. And I think that it's just a very beautiful thing that a lot of Christians especially struggle with. They struggle against who God made them to be, which is something that's inherently sinful, but also capable of approaching God, capable of having that tightrope, not having the tightrope, walking the tightrope.
Walking the tightrope.
God has given us the bar to help us balance. And sometimes we won't use it correctly, sometimes we won't use it at all. But the thing is, every time we fall into the pool, the ladder will still be there. And it'll take work to climb back out, climb up that ladder, but we can always do that.
Have you ever read the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius?
No, but you've recommended it to me like
I'm going to loan you
6
my
times
book because I think you would really, really like it.
I probably would. Yeah.
You don't need. It's not a book you read from cover to cover unless you feel like you're invested. It's usually one of those things like
kind of like a nightly thing, like
yeah.
going to bed.
I read most of it during a really dark time of my life. Whenever I went through my first breakup, I was so sad. I talked aversively about it because it's like looking back, I'm like, man, I was so sad, but why? But I get why. But it's just interesting because he was labeled by the Catholic Church as a virtuous pagan, which they applied to certain people, to certain thinkers that you were allowed to read. You know what I mean? Like he was virtue. He was like he was kind of preaching what we preach, but he just didn't know it. Sort of situation. So I think you might find it really interesting. Because I think Marcus Aurelius is actually really baked into Christian dogma. At least Christian, like good Christian, thought. But for now, we do need to be ending soon.
We got some birthdays to celebrate. We got some jobs to work. We got some games to play.
Games to play. That's all I want to do. I don't want to go to work. Oh my gosh. I just want to play Zomboid, man.
If you want to play Zomboid so bad, here's an idea.
Hey, you should buy it. It's $20.
Invent a zombie serum, inject it into your boss at work. And I can't go to work because my boss is a zombie, and then it'll spread.
Could you imagine, like I remember there was this, I saw this clip recently, I think it was from the Last of Us show, or The Walking Dead, like a later season. It was just like this one guy, like, living a solo post-apocalypse life. He, like, was farming and, like, building a fence and, like, doing all sorts of stuff that you would need to do. It was just very relaxing. I kind of really understood, like, that bend towards, like, I want to go live in the woods, build a cabin. You know what I mean? Like, I could really kind of identify with that. This is, like, something about taking care of your necessities that, like, makes modern life seem so silly. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It reminds me of, like, those funny, like, lo-fi music compilations, like, lo-fi beats to survive the zombie apocalypse, too, or something like that, where you're just building a fence.
Yeah.
It does seem really relaxing, though. I don't know if I'd enjoy that as a full lifestyle, but, like, maybe, like, taking one summer, just, like, go and live on a ranch or something might be nice.
I think that would be it just would reset your brain. I really wanted to go backpack across Europe, and I want to do it just because I want to have just what's on my back, and just walk around and see things, and just to remove yourself from, because like, obviously tons of people have done it. It's like the soul journey, soul quest. I'm going to India to study spirituality sort of situation. But I think that the reason a lot of people do it is because removing yourself, to back up to explain my thought process, sometimes it's really refreshing to be in a hotel room when it's empty. You don't want to live there. You don't want to stay there all the time, but just having empty walls, empty bookshelf, and just everything be empty and, like, clean, and just, like, it's so decompressing.
It is.
You feel like you can spread out.
Yeah, you don't have things that you look at and then, like, they remind you of other things and then start stressing you out and stuff like that.
It's not even just like your house, your room, your home is baked in, like, your life that you live, but the hotel room is just like there's no expectation. But for now, we bid you adieu.
Speaking of no expectation, I have no expectation that we are not going to be awesome this week, and that you're not going to be awesome this week. So be awesome this week.
You're gonna suck ass. Your horoscope is you'll trip and fall and die. Pessimism! No, I'm just joking. Don't be pessimistic. Have a good life.